borrow. They'll change the rules again, but that won't fool the bond markets. And we're just gonna, I don't know where it's going to end.
They made it practically impossible for people to talk about any matter related to immigration without being called racist. And that's created a really toxic environment filled with resentment.
Does Steve agree with Dominic Cummings on the state of the civil service and the grooming gangs cover-up, as well as us being on the verge of mass rioting and civil war? Hello, and welcome back to Last Orders. I'm Tom Slater, editor of Spiked, joined as I am in every single episode by Chris Snowdon from the IEA. How you doing, Chris?
Very well. You just caught me enjoying a little bit of Moretti from my special Last Orders glass.
Product
Good to be here.
If you want to give us some money, Moretti, it's free advertising every week, basically, at the moment.
Or just give us some Moretti.
Please do get in touch. We're also delighted to be joined by Steve Baker, former Tory MP, as well as a minister in the last government. How are you doing, Steve?
I'm absolutely brilliant. Delighted to be here.
It's great to have you. How's post-Parliament life treating you?
Well, it's great. It's busy. I'm trying to set up businesses that are interesting, important, fun, ethical, profitable. And it's going pretty well. Everything's a bit slow because the Chancellor's squashed the economy. Everyone's saving up for their national insurance increases. So things are a bit slow, but I'm loving it.
We should explain probably to the viewers, this is a special August holiday edition in that it's going to come out a couple of weeks after we record it. And so we're not going to be as topical as normal.
No, exactly.
Instead, we're just going to grill Steve.
Well, great. I'm glad I'm in the middle.
It works. And to talk a little bit about, I guess, the state of politics since you left Parliament, I think a good place to start is actually a couple of the interviews that you gave in the immediate aftermath. I'm thinking particularly of Good Morning Britain, where you not only completely laid waste to the mistakes of not only previous Tory governments, but also the previous Labour government, because Ed Balls and George Osborne were sat right there. But also I think you gave a pretty kind of prophetic take on where this Labour government were going to go, that we're all in for a pretty sorry time of it.
And I'm afraid you and George are as bad as each other on this particular score. And I've wasted a lot of breath in the House of Commons trying to explain to George in particular what was going on and the kind of injustice it was manufacturing, and not for the country, which is now going to have an absolutely miserable time under a Labour government.
Looking back, Steve, have things for this Labour government gone as bad, worse, maybe even a little better than you were thinking on that morning?
I think they've gone about as I expected. I did think they'd fall apart a bit sooner, but of course the Labour whips have been incredibly authoritarian with taking the whip off people for rebelling on ordinary policy votes. Just to be really clear for your listeners, viewers, that's not normal. Normally MPs only lose the whip on matters of confidence, like a literal confidence vote in the Commons or the King's Speech or something. So to take the whip off an MP for a normal policy vote, that is draconian. But I think the Labour whips are terrified of getting the kind of rebellions which I'm afraid I used to lead. So they've been super hardcore with Labour MPs. And of course, inevitably, you squeeze them down. It put them in a position where whatever one thinks of the policy, on that vote on disability benefits, they just came back with a rebellion so large the Labour whips couldn't possibly take the whip off everyone. And that was sort of bound to happen. And I thought they'd get rebellions like that sooner, but it was Labour whips authoritarianism that I think deferred it and made it worse.
And in terms of Rachel Reeves in particular, because I know in that interview, but also just an area that you're very knowledgeable and passionate about, is the economy, is the kind of the long tail of a lot of bad policy making over the course of the past 20 or so years. Has Rachel Reeves surprised you in either direction in terms of how bad, I suppose, her management of the economy has been?
I suppose I'm a bit surprised at just what an empty vessel she is, that the Treasury orthodoxy's just been poured into her. So if I can just unpack this a little bit. So I'd said that she looked miserable and it was only going to get worse because she was going to have to do austerity with these Labour MPs who've said austerity is a choice. And so for me, it was easy to foresee where it would go. But I remember Rachel Reeves berating people like me in the 2010 to 15 Parliament using words like cruel when we were clearing up the post-global financial crisis mess that they had left. So for her now to be just smoothly adopting the Treasury orthodoxy of cut disability benefits, it just shows that maybe she hasn't got that many strong views of her own. She's just doing the orthodoxy. The other thing is I remember walking to an event at the IEA, actually, with a former Chancellor. I won't say which one it was. But he said, of course, the way the UK economy works is house building, credit expansion, expanding the supply of debt, and immigration. But if you look at what Labour are trying to do, they can't go after increasing immigration because, of course, they can't politically. But They are, of course, trying for house building. That seems to have now fallen by the wayside. And they're going to, Rachel Reeves has said she's going to deregulate the city. Why would she do that? In order to get the supply of credit flowing. So again, the thing that surprised me about Rachel Reeves is she seems to be an empty vessel into which Treasury orthodoxy is poured. But I was just talking to some young people outside, some of your team on the way in, and of course they're very exercised about house prices. Of course they are. But that Chancellor told me why it's a problem. It's because for year after decade, the orthodoxy has been to build houses, pump cheap credit into those houses, lifting up the price, and bring more people in to compete for those houses, lifting up the price. So we shouldn't be surprised that housing's so unaffordable. And it's a dramatic injustice for young people.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Chris, anything that you want to chuck into the mix here for Steve?
Yeah, I mean, you were obviously very right. Well, it was a fantastic interview. But the point about she's going to have to try to do austerity with these MPs is the whole problem, right?
Yeah.
And you can call it the Treasury orthodoxy or not. I mean, the economic reality is that she either needs to greatly increase taxes or greatly cut spending. And she doesn't look very keen on doing either. She's not even that keen, really, on cutting spending. 5 billion off the welfare bill in however many years to come is nothing, really. I've been a bit... I genuinely thought that they would be forced, despite all their... every instinct in their body, I thought they would be forced to show... I'm not going to use the word austerity because I think it's extremely unhelpful, but to show some sort of fiscal rectitude.
Yeah. And
they're not. I think they are... Well, I don't think. It's a fact. They are borrowing 150 billion this year, probably. And it's always more than you think.
Yeah.
I think they're just going to borrow. They'll change the rules again, but that won't fool the bond markets. And we're just going to... I don't know where it's going to end.
Well, I'm going to be really frank here.
Please do.
I think where it ends is probably a currency collapse. Now, I know that's a really bold thing to say, but I've been banging on about this for years. I published a paper for Axiom Bitcoin, which I'll give you the link for, that goes through the key charts. But the sorry truth is that taxes are at their practical limit. At this height, they're probably doing much more harm than good. We've had deficit for year after year. We've got enormous debt. We've had amazingly easy money, cheap credit and credit expansion. The money supply tripled under New Labour from 97 to 2010 with new debt. Now, this is a very interesting place to be sitting here at Canary Wharf because I was working at Lehman Brothers across the dock there in the run-up to the global financial crisis.
I didn't know that.
And it's because I was there and saw what happened that I co-founded the Cobden Centre to talk about this stuff. But this is the thing, I'm afraid, for year after year, 50 years, we've needed chronic easy money, credit expansion, inflation, to make the bond market work. In other words, if government wants to keep on borrowing, that money has to be borrowed into existence. That's how the system works. And that borrowing money into existence is how it's created. And it's led to massive injustice, which people can feel in their everyday lives, but which too few people can explain. So where does it lead? Well, what happened during the coronavirus pandemic? The OBR showed us. And of course, the OBR, for all the criticisms, does show us a lot of interesting stuff. But they showed this chart with bars going up, the government borrowing, month after month, increasing borrowing to build that bridge through COVID. And alongside those bars, there's a series of diamonds, and that's the money creation by the Bank of England, the so-called QE. For the sake of argument, let's call it money printing. So when the government borrowed vast sums to get us through the pandemic, they weren't borrowing from savers. No. This is really important to understand. They effectively, the Bank of England printed all the money necessary to cover that borrowing. Now, during the pandemic, that was a period with massive deflationary forces. So they got away with that money printing during that period. My big worry is that next time it's tried, there won't be the massive deflationary forces of a pandemic. And so we'll probably get a bigger inflation sooner. And we know that after all that money printing for the pandemic, we did get an inflation. The cost of living absolutely soared.
Enormously.
What happens next time? So I'm afraid this is why I bang on about gold and Bitcoin. And this is why I think Bitcoiners have got a point. Unfortunately, economists as well as politicians don't really think very much about the nature of money and the monetary system. This is why Hayek, writing for the IEA, talked about the denationalisation of money in the 70s. He didn't win the argument. Here we are 50 years later. I'm afraid all of this is catching up with us. The long and the short of it, though, is very, very straightforward. Yes, it's true that governments don't have to live by the same rules as everybody else because in the end they can print money. But that's not a good thing. That's a problem. And it's all catching up with us. And in the end, government is going to have to behave like anybody else in a market economy and live within its means. And the question really to me is how much pain is going to come when? Because all the time we put off the pain by, for example, the Conservative Party and Reform opposing the winter fuel payment reduction, means testing of winter fuel allowance, all the time that we're being, frankly, stupid on relatively modest age-related spending cuts, that just stores up more pain later rather than trying to get through things sooner. And this is where politics needs to go. It's not to say nobody wants pain, nobody wants difficult spending cuts, but there are going to be difficult spending cuts. And the choice we have is either deal with it now in a way which maximises people's well-being and minimises pain, or painful cuts will be forced upon us later, just when the money runs out and inflation really kicks in.
Yeah. Were you, I don't know what year it was, about 2000 maybe? Do you remember Bill Clinton with his debt clock?
Yeah.
And he brought the deficit down to zero. And around about the same time, in fact, slightly earlier, I think, the deficit came down. It was under the first Labour term, wasn't it, under Blair? But it was because of Tory tax and spend promises, which Labour promised to continue. It's almost impossible imagining either of those two countries balancing the books now. I mean, it's completely impossible. And it's, in a way, it's remarkable that anybody ever did that when you got access to credit, that you had politicians who were grown up enough to try and act in the long-term interest of the country. And I just think the democratic forces, the popular forces, people basically want more spending on public services and lower taxes. They obviously can't have it except through more borrowing. I just doesn't seem with the current crop of politicians you're ever going to have kind of cross-party support for anything close to wiping out the deficit.
So I absolutely agree with what you say, yes. This is public choice theory at work. I'm afraid what the public want in aggregate is high spending and low taxes, and you can't have that. But that's what politicians keep offering. I suppose where I just differ from you a little bit is I wouldn't give too much credit to the politicians of the Blair era because, as I said to Balls and Osborne, what they neglect is that between 97 and 2010, the money supply tripled in an accelerating rush to destruction. That's why they thought they'd abolish the boom-bust cycle. To put it colloquially, I've got at least £10,000 worth of credit on credit cards in my pocket. I could go out of here today and live like a king until the credit runs out. And that's what they did. So they looked grown up. They got towards balancing the books and all that. They looked like grown-ups. But the phenomenon which was happening, which was helping them, was a massive expansion in the supply of money as new debt. And that phenomena is too rarely talked about. And it's what made Blair and Brown look like they knew what they were doing with the economy. They didn't really, and it resulted in the global financial crisis, which hit the UK particularly hard. And I'm afraid this is what happens when you expand the supply of money as debt. It feels great at the time, but it's like eating candy floss. You get a big rush of energy, but then you've got to live with the aftermath. And, you know, this is the Austrian School of Economics insights. And I'm afraid most people are not Austrian school. And
there we are. And we've talked a bit about Labour and we've also talked about, I suppose, the decades running up to this. But should we turn back to your own party, to the Conservative Party, currently led by Kemi Badenoch, but at the same time there's a lot of slings and arrows headed her way, both from within inside and outside the party. Yeah. How do you think she's doing at this point in terms of, I guess, making an impression on the debate, but also coming up with some of the answers to some of the problems that are confronting us?
To be honest, I think she's doing about as I would expect any leader of the opposition to be doing now. The mistake that was made by all the leadership candidates, I'm afraid, is they should have been telling everybody, including their own MPs, nobody's going to listen to us for 2 years. They allowed MPs to hear what they wanted to hear, which was like, we're about to come back to government. They should have been really clear. We're out now for 5 years. We're out because the public stayed at home. And we've got to regain the trust of the public. It starts with mea culpa. We messed up. It then continues with being sensible, professional, consistent, trustworthy, positive, and regaining the trust of the public for 2 and possibly 3 years. And only after 2 to 3 years will we remotely be in a position that the public will start to hear us. So the big mistake is nobody was saying that in the contest. I think it should have been said, because people, they might not want to hear it, but they would have known it was right, that no one was going to listen to us for 2 years. We weren't about to come back. This Labour government, of course, will run for 5 years. I say, of course. I can't conceive of Labour MPs voting to go to a general election in a confidence vote. Of course they won't. So it's going to be 5 years. It's going to be awful. And I wish Kemi had been telling people, please don't expect us to do brilliantly in the local elections after a year, because we won't. Because, by the way, Nigel Farage is going to be eating our lunch as well. And so I think it was a mistake not to say that. But I think she's playing a very difficult hand, well enough. But I don't think anyone should have expected it to be going well by now.
Mm-hmm.
She did, to be fair to her, she did sort of say something along the lines of, there won't be any new policies for a year or two. We're going to really sit down and think about it, and then tell you what we're going to do if you vote us in again. The trouble was that, as you say, Farage was eating a lunch, and politics is a very fast-moving 24/7 business. And for the Conservative leader to seem to have gone quiet, naturally worried a lot of Tory councillors who were going to lose their seats, and Tory MPs who wanted to see more momentum. I think you're right that in 4 years' time, we'll look back and go, there was no point the Tories doing anything for the first couple of years, or in possibly the first 5 years, as with William Hague. But this kind of softy approach doesn't seem very well suited to the modern age.
No, absolutely. So I think Kemi's good in the media. I encourage her to do more media, more videos, and be more on the attack. She's great on the attack, and we saw that a lot before she was leader of the opposition. And I think she's fantastic when she goes full on attack, and she should do that. But obviously, there's a case for fighting all the time, pointing out the shortcomings of Labour. Andrew Griffith is doing a fantastic job on the economy and on the business side. And that should certainly be done. But I absolutely don't want to needlessly criticise her. Mm-hmm. At this stage of the Parliament, it was always going to be fabulously difficult to make an impact.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of people, either within the sort of Tory media or activist set, are already getting quite twitchy. There's already treatment of Robert Jenrick in particular as the potential kind of king over the water. What do you make of that and the kind of head of steam that he's been building up, and how quickly people seem to be turning towards him as a potential?
Well, Robert is a terrific campaigner. Of course he is. He's doing a terrific job of speaking very directly to the issues which concern people. And that's fantastic. But, when things go badly or are difficult, people will always look to grass being greener somewhere else. I think the problem Robert would have had if he'd won, what he was trying to do was get a mandate to say our policy is to come out of the ECHR and then enforce it on everybody having won. And I'm afraid politicians keep doing this. They think it's enough to win with a mandate and then everyone else will row in. And the naivety of it is profound. That is just not how MPs work. They say, no, they would say, I think we're going to have to come out of the ECHR, and I lament it because I think it's highly undesirable, but I think we are going to have to do it. But politicians who've made their mind up and taken a public position will say, no, I am against that. And if Robert had won and made it his policy, he would have just divided the Conservative Party in Parliament, as all those who didn't support the policy said no. And it would have been a disaster from the off on the ECHR, because it would have immediately challenged his authority, immediately made the Conservative Party look split, and would have made us look like a pantomime just when we needed to start looking coherent. That's one of the reasons I voted for Kemi. So I've got a lot of admiration for Robert, but I'm afraid a lot of the people around him now, that blood's gone to their head, and they're not going to like me saying it, but I've seen it time and again in politics. When people are doing well, blood rushes to the head, and then they cease to be able to listen to other people. And it's how mistakes get made. So I hope Robert and his team will continue doing all the fantastic stuff they're doing it. But I would encourage them, if they're currently running at 10/10, I would encourage them to just dial it back a bit to maybe 8/10, because I think at the moment the risk of error is quite significant for him.
And we were talking there a bit about the fact that the Tory party under Kemi Badenoch have tried to make a virtue out of taking their time where policy is concerned, a few announcements here or there, but almost seemingly in reference to Thatcher and her policy commissions taking some time to actually come up with what their precise kind of prognosis is. As that debate and as that process is ongoing, if there are a couple of things that you think policy-wise they should be focusing on, or they should actually just be making policy, is there anything that you in particular want to put into the mix here?
Immigration, energy. Immigration, because of course you have right now. It's undoubtedly the number one issue out there in the public square, isn't it? And
it is at the Britannia Hotel, just a short walk from over here as well.
The public are right to be exercised about it, and a massive mistake was made over many years by the progressive liberal, so-called liberal left. They made it practically impossible for people to talk about any matter related to immigration without being called racist. And that's created a really toxic environment filled with resentment. And no one should exploit that, because we need to remember that there are thousands, millions of people who are either immigrants or descended from immigrants who have a right to be here, for whom this is their country. I'm thinking about second, third, fourth generation people I know. I'm thinking about first generation migrants who've been here since before I was born, people in Wickham. That this is their home, they should be made welcome. We need to be very specific about the conduct we disapprove of. We should be very specific about cultural aspects we disapprove of. And we should be very clear that it's not racism to say that you object to something, for good, impartial reasons. Plainly, it's racist to hate people because of the colour of their skin. But it's not racist to say that you're concerned when somebody asks for example, a blasphemy law. And it should just be okay to have these legitimate conversations. And the so-called liberal left actually became extremely authoritarian on that. And that's a massive mistake. And the other one is energy policy. Kemi's basically adopted the policy that I fought for while I was an MP, of extreme scepticism about net zero. I don't mind us decarbonising, but I think we should be using market mechanisms. In other words, not having billions of pounds of subsidy. People are telling us that wind and solar is cheap. It's not true. If only the fact checkers would go and dig into it. Funny, I love fact checkers, and I don't mind donating to one of them, but I just do wish they'd impartially go after all of the facts. And I'm afraid on energy policy, we're being really let down. People should be looking at the cost of subsidising renewals and grid balancing and so forth. Renewables are not inexpensive.
Do you think the Tory party either should or might simply split? That it's too much of a broad church? Because there seems to me to be a sort of realignment of politics. People are now voting for the party they really want to vote for, rather than holding their nose and voting for the party that's going to keep the other one out. So you've got 4 parties in the polls at the moment who, with a good head of steam, could win the next election, in theory, right? And you've got Jeremy Corbyn's new party potentially coming up and splitting the far left, i.e. the Greens, well, the left in general, the Labour Party, the Greens, and his party. And it seems to me, at least, that a party that can have in, say, Sarah Wollaston, Steve Bryan, yourself, Philip Davis, is simply too broad. And that half of them should go off to the Lib Dems and the other half should form an alignment with Reform.
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack in that. So there's immense merit, of course there is, in what you say. I think the problem that we face in politics is that you need a programme for government. There's 2 ways to have a programme for government. Either the party forms the programme for government and wins a majority, and then that is the party's programme. It's what was in the manifesto, which people either voted for or against. Or you fragment the party system, have many more parties, and whether it's because of first past the post or perhaps we ended up going to PR, although that seems a diminishing prospect now, I'm against it. But under a PR system, you could end up with a coalition. And the problem, as we saw with 2010 and the Cameron, Osborne, Clegg and Alexander years, is that once you get into a coalition, you don't get the government you voted for. You get a programme for government which was agreed behind closed doors in horse trading, where you get a little bit of everybody's programme. And I think the problem, if you're a voter...
But maybe more people get a government they quite like. That's the other argument. You don't necessarily have to have the government that 30% of the public voted for. You might settle for a government that 60% of the public are fairly happy with.
You might. I mean, that is an argument for PR, is that provided you're willing to put up with the sort of mishmash that you get anyway, that maybe a coalition and a proportional system's a way to go. But personally, I'm afraid I think the problems that we face sometimes are very black and white. we can't afford the spending, to come back to that issue. The OBR chart shows debt soaring away, spending soaring away, debt soaring away, and tax revenues actually declining because we're beyond the practical limits of taxation. So the problem that we face isn't really one of, oh, let's put up this tax. No, because taxes are at their practical limit. And when you get into, well, I'd like to spend a bit more on this or that. No, actually, we need to be cutting spending. And it's so imperative that we cut spending and so imperative that we cut taxes that almost anything, any other conversation about what people do or don't like is almost whimsical. We're going to be hit full square in the face by financial crisis, I think, not very far into the future. And what we're going to need is a consistent, coherent, dutiful government which understands the absolute imperative of balancing the books and going for growth.
So what should we cut them? This is a big question. If you were Prime Minister, you're not going to put the tax up.
Winter fuel allowance for everyone, for a start.
Mm-hmm.
When it came in, I'm old enough to remember it coming in, and pensioners in Wickham were better off pensioners saying, I'm going to give it to charity. I'm going to use it to buy a good bottle of whiskey to give someone. Yep. It was like a joke. But as usual with politics, once people get used to it, and then it's an injustice when it's taken away. So that's for one.
Triple lock?
Yeah, I said that while I was an MP, the triple lock's going to have to go. It's plainly unaffordable in a way which is escalating.
How did that go down with your constituents?
Terrible.
Yeah.
But the point that's got to be made to people, well, actually, when I said it and it appeared in the newspapers, nobody really raised it. I can't remember anyone writing to me about it. But then it wasn't about to become policy. I think the triple lock was put in by George Osborne as a political landmine for the next Labour government. Because we had a bunch of landmines, right? Like the 50p rate of tax.
Mm-hmm.
Labour put that in as a landmine for us, and then we danced around it and didn't just repeal it early on. This is partly why, when I was speaking to George Osborne to his face, I was able to go so weapons-free. Because the man just made so many cataclysmic mistakes, like the boundary changes, trying to reduce the number of seats, because reducing the number of seats created a huge political problem for Labour in the north. So he won the moral high ground argument for equalising the seat size, but he couldn't practically get the vote through because Nadine Dorries and Bill Wigan and others wouldn't vote for their own seat to be abolished. So eventually we end up equalising the seat sizes, but with smaller seats, which means you get an extra MP in Buckinghamshire and an extra MP in Oxfordshire, which means you lose Witney and Wickham. And the stupidity of it. And it just goes on with him. And the triple lock was another one of these ones. It was so obviously unaffordable. I think he put it in there so that when Labour won in 2015, he could criticise them for taking it out. And then he only went and won. And I remember sitting in committee room 14, right up the front. David Cameron's up there at the front telling everybody how delighted he is to win. He doesn't look like he's delighted. And he's thanking George Osborne and congratulating him. I'm thinking, where is George? And there was George sitting on the stairway, sitting with his arms on his thing and his head down. He looked absolutely disconsolate. Why? Because he had written a manifesto to be bargained away in coalition with the Lib Dems. And then he accidentally won outright. And this was, when you were there, you could see it, feel it in the atmosphere that Cameron and Osborne didn't mean to win 2015 outright. And so this, I think, is the truth. I can't say for sure, but I think this is the actual story of the triple lock. It was a political landmine, which now everybody's committed to, and it's ruinous. And that, again, is why I was able to be quite weapons-free with Balls and Osborne.
Absolutely. And before I want to make sure we've got some time to go through the postbag of listeners who've got some questions to put to you. But before we do that, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit more about Reform, who are obviously the big political story at the moment, easily the largest party in terms of the polls. If any of these quite early days, but nevertheless interesting seat projections or anything to go by, they're at least odds on to be at least the largest party in the next parliament potentially. What do you make of them, their rise, and if they've got any of the answers to what's going on at the moment?
Well, many of my erstwhile friends and supporters have gone over to Reform, and I know they would like me to go to Reform. And when I go to events that are very Reform heavy, you can see I'm not very popular when I get there, purely because they know I think Reform is not the answer to all our problems. People have said to me that Reform's a libertarian party, and Nigel and I and Richard and I agree on everything. And I'm not so sure, partly because I look at what Nigel's actually saying. It's just not libertarian. He's not looking like the UK's Millet. He's looking like a man who says whatever he needs to say to maximise his vote, including from the left. And it will lead to a policy programme that we can't possibly afford. We saw that on Sunday, where he was talking about water privatisation. And when Laura Kuenssberg challenged him on the cost of it, he just deferred it to, well, we'll have a negotiation. And that again, it's hubris to just believe that we can afford this because I'm such a brilliant negotiator. Afraid we're going to find politics is a bit more difficult than that. And I'm afraid I've seen that again and again. I spoke at a conference, Reasoned, and unfortunately I walked into the back of the room just to one side of the audience, and it put people, it was lovely and flattering, but it put the audience off when they should have been listening to Nigel. And once he realised I was there, he sort of turned the wick up on saying how badly the Tories had failed. But his fundamental message, which I think he actually said a couple of times, I'd have to go and find the tape, was that things would be easy if only, this would be easy if only the Tories would try. And it's like, oh, afraid it's not true. Everything's difficult. All the easy problems have been solved. Like leaving the ECHR will be difficult. Be difficult for international relations, be difficult in Northern Ireland. There's no risk to the rights of people in the United Kingdom or in Northern Ireland. The problem is not objective, it's political. In Northern Ireland, every day unionist politicians get up wanting to keep Northern Ireland in the Union, and every day nationalist politicians get up wanting a united Ireland. And so anything in Northern Ireland's dealt with through that lens, and the European Convention on Human Rights is part of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, because it was a problem in the past that Catholics' rights were trespassed upon. So as soon as you try and take the UK out of the ECHR, Sinn Féin, it seems to me, are extremely likely to maximise their leverage and say to Catholics and nationalists who are marginal voters who don't get up every day thinking about United Ireland, oh, here you go, your rights are going to be trespassed upon. They're just bound to do it politically. And that's why it'll be hard, because they might do it very successfully. And as soon as the terms of the agreement are that as soon as it appears to the Secretary of State that there is a majority for a united Ireland, he's to hold a border poll. So that's what Sinn Féin aim for all the time, to make it appear in polling that there's a majority for a united Ireland, get a border poll, get a united Ireland. It would be a nightmare if it happened for Ireland. People have started to work out that it means a new Ireland. It's not just a question of absorbing Northern Ireland. It's a new Ireland, a new anthem, a new flag. And people are starting to work through that. But of course, just like Brexiteers, nationalists want their constitutional change now and don't much care about how difficult it is. And all of that will come tumbling out when we try and leave the ECHR. And Nigel will find it all terribly difficult if he's Prime Minister. And that's my big problem with him, actually, is he says whatever people want to hear, and he tells them that it's easy. And it's just not. Everything's difficult.
And I suppose to play devil's advocate slightly, or at least to look at why he's been given the so much wind in his sails in recent times. I mean, if you think about the 2019 election, they were so squeezed, the Farage-Easters, because of the fact that there was a Tory government, which I'm sure there were many policies that Boris Johnson was pursuing that you didn't agree with on a pointed principle, but it clearly spoke to that sense of we're going to listen to voters after the whole Brexit interregnum. There was a kind of sense that people's concerns, which had been ignored, whether that was about migration or the European Union or identity politics or whatever it was, they had a kind of home in the Conservative Party. That was completely obliterated. So surely it just opened the doors for a reform Farage resurgence, saying that we're actually going to do this properly. What these jokers over here pretended to do and then did the opposite on, say, something like migration, we're actually going to be serious about. Isn't that inevitable that something like this was going to happen as a
You must be right. And that is why I constantly say that politicians make a mistake when they're inauthentic. Too many politicians are willing to just go out and say what the pollsters and staffers have told them needs to be said. And that is a disaster. And we saw it with Brexit. We had people trying to take us out of the EU who didn't believe in leaving the EU. And it's not that I want true believers, because you can't test that. It's just a terrible mistake to be led by people who are not actually earnestly committed to what they're doing, because it means they don't have by not having their heart in it, they end up that their mind doesn't follow. You know, I really believe in freedom. I really want to make the state smaller. And I believe in that because it will promote the prosperity of everyone, and especially the poorest. You know, the NHS is a story of the capture of the state by doctors against the interests of patients. The working class patients and the medical establishment makes that very clear, written by somebody, David Green, who was a Labour councillor. Brilliant book. And it goes on again and again that the state's advancement advances the middle class ruling class people over ordinary people. So I'm passionately committed to reducing the size of the state and enlarging liberty in the interests of everyone. And that, if I was doing it, that's what you get. Mm-hmm. That's why I wanted to leave the European Union, so that ordinary people's vote would count for something when they voted. But what we ended up with was people who really preferred to stay in the European Union having to make all the right noises. I'm going to pick on Jeremy Hunt because he's a big enough figure, and I like him, and he can take it, and he knows I regard him very highly. But he committed an error which is in Eurosceptic 101. Do not ever compare the European Union to the Soviet Union. And he did it, and it was a disaster. But only somebody who wasn't a Eurosceptic would do that. Mm-hmm. And like putting citizens' rights on the table, Theresa May did that. I just joined the government. I couldn't believe it. And of course, nobody asked me as a Brexit minister what I thought about that policy, which is, again, ridiculous.
And even Farage was criticising that.
But it was mad. But again, you see, even Farage, this is the thing. For a Brexiteer, you knew what you wanted was democratic control of political power. You didn't want to alienate the many thousands of good people who live in the UK who happen to be European. Mm-hmm. And if you're actually a Brexiteer, you knew that and you wouldn't make the mistake.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because she wasn't a Brexiteer, she thought, oh, what noises, I presume, what noises can I make which will sound Brexity? Oh, Brexiteers don't like European people, she probably thought. So let's say this. And of course, it was a disaster because Brexiteers are all cringing and hating it because we know that's not where we're coming from. We know the alienation it will produce, and we know it will poison relations with the European Union. What should have happened is a statement should have been made. If you're here from the European Union, you will be welcome to stay. We're grateful that you make the contribution to our country that you do. And I'm not sure yet how it's going to be done in law. We're going to work that out, but I want to be absolutely sure from this moment that you know you are welcome. And we're going to say to our European partners, we wish you to extend the same welcome to British people who live in the European Union. We'll sort the details out later. But if you don't currently live in the UK, please don't come, because as of this moment, you will not have a right to remain. And that would have been clear then. If you're here, you're welcome, thank you. If you're not here, don't come. And a Brexiteer would have said, yep, that's fair enough. And everyone could have lived with that. Because we could have said, it's not about whether you're Spanish, German, Italian or French. It's that we want to control the numbers. We love you. You're great. Thank you. And again, as a Brexiteer, this is the problem with inauthenticity. When people don't truly believe in what they're doing, they just make cock up after cock up. And for those of us who do genuinely believe in a thing, you despair of what you're watching. And again, the triple lock going in, if I'm right that the triple lock was put in as a booby trap for Labour, it's just too clever by half. And I'm sick of too clever by half politicians. Work out what you truly believe and why it's right and in the national interest, in the public interest, and then make the case for it. And of course, the difference between me and other politicians is I'd rather lose than get a mandate to do the wrong thing. Now, as it happens, I did just lose. But I didn't lose because of anything I did. I lost because other people bet on the election, because Rishi didn't stay to the end of D-Day, because of the general chaos of it. But if I'd lost in 2019, that would have been my fault over Brexit. I lost 2,000 voters. There's no way I could get them back. But in 2024, I lost because of factors beyond my control. But I want a government that knows what's right, consistently articulates for it in a positive fashion, and is constructive with everybody about it, and explains with great passion why it's right, and seeks to win on that basis. And then when the other lot, if they lose, if the other lot win and do something else and it fails, you can say, well, forgive me, but we told you this would happen. Please vote for us at the next election.
We've got to dip into the bulging postbag statement, but just very quickly, going back to that brilliant interview, I get the impression, correct me if I'm wrong, that you think that Ed Balls and George Osborne do not have any particularly deep political beliefs. I think it's all a bit of a game. That's certainly my impression.
I do think that, and I thought that throughout the... I mean, the two of them absolutely defined the fiscal conversation during 10 to 15. And any fiscal event was about George versus Ed. And again, lovely if you just think it's a game, and it's great for them. It's led to them being presenters together and all that's super.
Got a podcast.
It's just that the OBR figures now show spending racing away and revenues, stagnating, coming down. It's a disaster. Now, to his credit, George Osborne did take steps on pensions like auto-enrolment and so forth and raising a pension age. Difficult things like the WASPy women. It's difficult. People like me were sitting down with ladies, very nice, sweet ladies, about our mum's age. And we're having to tell them, I'm so sorry, you're going to have to work a few more years. And that's not a nice thing to have to do, especially when they normally vote for you. It's horrible. So to his credit, he did do some difficult things, but he wrecked it all by doing stupid things like the triple lock. So those guys, I do think for those guys, it's all about them. For a lot of politicians, it's all about what can I get for me because I want status. And I despise that. We need politicians who know that it's a duty and it's difficult, and it'd be better for them if they weren't an MP, instead of people who go into politics because they want MP after their name and, like me, Privy Councillor, Right Honourable beforehand, because they want status. And it's not doing the public any good. But whose fault is it in a democracy? Sorry, voters, it's all your fault.
The people. Tom,
let's turn to the people right now.
Asking?
Exactly.
What do the people think?
In the postbags.
Postbag. It's bulging,
So, first of all, we've got one on here from X at Sussex by the Sea, number 4. Are you happy with Brexit? It's a pretty wide open question, but there's been a lot of talk about, regret incessantly over recent years, and was it done properly? Is there still things left to address? But given that we've got, Labour starting to unpick it now, I mean, how do you feel about how Brexit has been?
I am happy that we are outside the jurisdiction of the EU, yes. I am not happy that it is, as you say, Keir Starmer's choosing to sort of partially bring us in. The justification for that is, of course, partly Northern Ireland. In Northern Ireland, it is unfinished business. It is not acceptable to unionists or Eurosceptics that Northern Ireland is partially still subject to EU law. It's only a small proportion of EU law, but it's not right. But I made a big apology, cost me dear politically, in order to unblock the process and move us on. And the Windsor framework was progress. But that bit does still remain unfinished business, and we could do better. But what's happened there is we threw the points so that there was then a relationship of trust and mutual respect for interests. And that's the basis on which we need to proceed, because Northern Ireland is not going to have a hard border on it. Northern Ireland is not going to be a place where nothing is done to protect the legitimate interests of Ireland and the EU. It's a place where something special is always going to be done. And what I took from the Windsor framework as a massive success is that I and others were saying we would need special administrative and technical arrangements in order to protect the border without any infrastructure. And people told us unicorns, magical thinking. But it is in the end what was done. Yeah, we were right again. Trade deals. Even this rotten government that believes in being in the EU has still managed to secure trade deals with India and the USA. The UK has acceded to CPTPP. We rolled over loads of other trade deals like with Canada. And we can do more and do better. CPTPP, the Pacific Rim trade deal, offers the tantalising possibility of getting free trade for the 21st century, but without political integration. And that's the problem of the EU. Yes, it's true it delivers free trade if you're within it, but it delivers free trade with political subordination. Well, we said no to that. And I'm afraid some of this stuff requires real clarity of thought. When you vote to leave a legal institution, that means you've chosen to be outside its jurisdiction. And so people trying to be half in and calling it a soft Brexit, that's not really good faith. That's bad faith. Oh, by the way, who was it who came up with hard and soft Brexit? I'm just trying to remember. George.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, George Osborne came up with hard and soft Brexit. Again, trying to defeat it. And it's just bad faith, and it's proven a horrible mistake. What I would say to your caller and others who ask is, at this stage, no one's really going to change their mind. I'm glad we're out of the EU. I want to do the right things now we're out and stay out. People who are still determined we should never have left and for whom it's a very important issue are going to continue to find all the reasons why we should rejoin. God bless them. We're never going to agree. That's partly why I've got the provocation people with Professor Paul Dolan, because that's how we can all agree to disagree more gracefully and embed tolerance by design. and stop hating the people we disagree with. Because I am widely hated over this issue, and it's not nice. But it's not about me. It's about our whole society started hating people we disagree with. And actually, the vast majority of us all want the same stuff: peace, prosperity, and peaceful coexistence. The question is how. Let's not hate each other over it. But that was a longer answer than I meant.
And also it leads very nicely into the second, much bleaker question, which I wanted to ask you here was, does Steve agree with Dominic Cummings on the state of the civil service and the grooming gangs cover-up, as well as us being on the verge of mass rioting and civil war? So kind of the opposite of the respectful disagreement, the fact that things are quite restive out there at the moment. And do you, I suppose, agree that we're at a kind of inflection point where concerns about immigration and so on are...
I certainly think we're at an inflection point. I really worry that talk of civil war has now become a thing that in ordinary discourse we're talking about. When it
on the right especially, it's become a very hot topic.
Well, it used to be a far-right trope, and it's really frightening that people think, who's going to be fighting whom with what? I mean, what? I mean, it's amazing that we have to take it seriously. When I go home, as I will later, to Wickham, I see a community with 20% British Muslims, 5% Caribbean, and lots of other people. We've got both sides of the Sri Lankan dispute represented in Wickham. We've got 47 languages spoken in one primary school I can think of. And Wickham is a peaceful, well-integrated place. It's got loads of problems, lots of poverty. There's a very particular problem that in some schools, 70% of the children have English as a second language. That's not good for them, not good for the community. But Wickham is not a place seething with discontent. Somebody will write to me and say, oh, there's no-go areas in Wickham. They just haven't told you. I was the MP for 14 years. I once walked in our most Asian area, most Muslim Asian area, and a man crossed the street to give me a hug and say thank you for the way I looked after the community. This is not like a no-go area. And yeah, there's tensions, particularly when the Gaza issue is so divisive. But I'm afraid people are getting carried away. And I think anyone who thinks we're in danger of civil war needs to, I'm sorry, get out more. That there is a massive problem with illegal migration. There's a massive problem with altogether too much money being spent on people who shouldn't be here. And that's just got to be dealt with. But when it comes to long-term social cohesion and our ability to just get on with one another, I'm profoundly optimistic. But not profoundly optimistic because I live in dreamy isolation. Profoundly optimistic because for 14 years, I spent most of my Fridays and Saturdays in Wickham, in a community that's incredibly diverse, that just lives in peace and gets on with things, even as they disagree about theology and politics and everything else.
And it's, as you say, it's not to say that there aren't quite important problems that need to be solved around immigration or integration or whatever, but there certainly is an appetite for catastrophizing around these.
This doesn't go out for another 2 weeks. We could have a civil war start in the meantime.
We will cut out this section.
There is a problem. There is a really serious problem we've got to be careful of. There is a branch of mathematics and social theory called catastrophe theory, which suggests that in certain circumstances you can get major transitions in the state of a society. And it's used, for example, to predict prison riots. Very difficult to do, as everything is to do with what goes on in anyone's head. But we mustn't talk up riots. I mean, even if we did think we're on the cusp of them, it's pretty important not to talk them up. Now, that doesn't diminish what I've said, but none of us want riots. It doesn't solve anything. It just destroys wealth and sows poison into relations. So I think we are in a time of incredible tension and an inflection point, but that doesn't mean that we should be expecting to have riots. No.
So very finally, Steve, as you know, because I've briefed you on this matter,
Yes.
on this podcast, because we're very libertarian and anti-ban, we do invite our guests to indulge their inner authoritarian right at the end to say if there was one thing that just irked them, that just irritated them, if they had to have one ban, what would it be?
You are a dictator.
Ketchup sachets. They're messy. There's not enough ketchup in them.
That's another. I hadn't thought about that. You need 2 or 3.
Do you want bigger ketchup sachets, really?
No, Chris. That is a terrible authoritarian thing. You want to regulate ketchup sachets. I just want to ban them. But no, I mean, I'd rather not. But I mean, ketchup sachets are an affront to working class dining. And everyone knows that ketchup should come in a bottle.
Shaped like a tomato, preferably.
Oof.
Not so sure about that.
No?
I
You like
like
the standard kind of red, kind of greasy spoon bottle.
Yeah.
That sort of, yeah. Doesn't have to be as festive.
I like
as
a squeezy bottle, but to be honest, I've fallen in love with, I think it's Stokes ketchup, which is, I'm afraid, better than Heinz. It's probably posh, expensive ketchup. Somebody's going to pick me up on it. But as I've become a member of the middle classes, I've graduated to Stokes.
There we go.
Ketchup in a glass bottle. But ban sachets.
Do you know who has banned ketchup sachets?
The European Union.
Correct. And on that bombshell,
I am not going to rejoin just to ban ketchup sachets.
finally, one more clip. The second greatest political interview of all time. Let's see it.
What do you want to do if you're not an MP?
Skydiving, motorcycling, fast catamaran sailing.
Did you do those things?
Yes, I did. Absolutely. I'm going to Morocco with an old friend to motorcycle in the autumn. I've been around Scotland and Wales already. I've been back for 2 weeks in Greece, sailing very, very fast catamarans, very fast ones. And I've been skydiving. In fact, I'm going skydiving with some of my very, very special friends from the armed forces this Friday.
There you go. Promises kept, promises delivered.
There we go.
See you in 2 weeks.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Last Orders. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you subscribe and click the bell so you never miss another spiked video. If you're listening to this on your podcast app, make sure you subscribe there and give us a glowing 5-star review. And if you'd like to get in touch with your questions or ban suggestions, email us at lastorders@spiked-online.com.